Lucas West never believed in fate, until the night a rain-soaked child stood between him and the exit to everything he thought he knew. Rain poured steadily over Manhattan, turning the sidewalks into shining rivers and casting shimmering reflections from the high-rise lights above. The entrance of the luxury hotel sparkled under the soft glow of the chandelier inside, its glass facade streaked with water as people hurried in and out, shielded by umbrellas or pulled along by doormen. None of them noticed the small figure crouched beside one of the marble columns near the grand entrance. She didn't belong to this world of wealth and warm lobbies. The girl was about 6 years old, her small frame shaking from the cold. Her chestnut hair clung to her cheeks, soaked through and plastered to her skin. Her jacket, too thin for the weather and torn at the sleeve, was dark with rain. She had no umbrella, no backpack or suitcase, nothing but a soaked stuffed animal that she held tightly against her chest as though it could warm her. Her knees were tucked up under her, trying to conserve heat, and every now and then she peeked out to watch the revolving door spin, people stepping in from the storm, dry and clean, brushing past without a second glance. For a while, no one said anything. The girl hoped they wouldn't notice her. But hope didn't last long. A tall man in a black uniform stepped out from the shadows inside the lobby. The hotel's security guard, his brows already furrowed with disapproval, walked toward her with heavy steps. She noticed him only when his shoes stopped right in front of her. "Hey," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. "You can't stay here. This isn't a shelter." The girl didn't answer. She looked up at him with large eyes but didn't move, only clutched her toy tighter. The guard exhaled sharply, not heartless but clearly unsure what to do. He leaned down slightly, perhaps to ask another question, or maybe to guide her away by the arm. Still, she didn't resist. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her shoulders curled in as if trying to make herself invisible. She was so small, soaked to the bone, silent. And just as the guard reached out again, the girl closed her eyes, as if she knew she was about to be sent back into the cold. Lucas West stepped through the glass doors of his hotel with his phone in one hand and a leather folder in the other, his mind still racing from the investor meeting that had just ended. His schedule was tight, as always, and he moved with practiced efficiency, nodding to the concierge without slowing, already scanning his inbox. Dressed in a tailored navy coat and polished shoes that splashed through the edge of a rain puddle, he didn't even glance outside at the storm. Rain didn't matter to men like him. Business did. Inside the lobby, warm lighting reflected off marble floors and golden accents, and the subtle scent of fresh lilies filled the air. The hotel was exactly as he'd designed it to be, flawless, discreet, luxurious. Lucas barely noticed the people passing through. He was about to enter the elevator when a sharp voice broke through the ambient murmur of conversations and gentle music. A security guard's tone, unusually pointed. Then, faintly beneath it, something else. A small, broken sound. A child's sob. Lucas paused mid-step. His thumb hovered over a half-typed reply on the screen, but he didn't hit send. The sound didn't fit here. Not in this place of order and comfort. Slowly, he turned his head toward the entrance, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. The scene near the column unfolded in an instant. The security guard stood over something, or someone, blocking part of Lucas's view. But then the guard shifted, and Lucas saw her. A child. Small, hunched, soaked. She looked completely out of place in the gold and glass world around her, as though someone had dropped a pencil sketch into a colored photograph. She wasn't crying loudly, just letting out quiet, controlled sobs like someone who had already learned that noise got her nowhere. Without fully realizing why, Lucas began walking toward them. His stride wasn't rushed, but it was deliberate, and his presence immediately caused the guard to straighten. Lucas didn't speak at first. He just took in the girl's soaked hair, her shaking shoulders, the stuffed animal crushed to her chest. There was something jarring about her silence, something that tugged at a place inside him he usually kept sealed shut. The guard opened his mouth to explain, but Lucas raised one hand slightly, stopping him. The phone was forgotten in his other hand now, the screen going dark. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring at the child who had no business being alone outside on a night like this. And in that moment, something inside him shifted, not with drama, not with noise, but with the quiet, inevitable weight of recognition. "Leave her," Lucas said quietly, his voice even but with a finality that left no room for argument. The security guard hesitated, glancing from the girl to his employer and then back again, before stepping away with a short nod. Lucas waited until the man was out of earshot before crouching down to the girl's level, careful not to startle her. The marble floor was cold beneath his knees, but he didn't notice. His attention was fixed entirely on the small figure in front of him. The girl looked up at him with cautious eyes, her lashes wet and clumped together from the rain. Her lips were slightly parted, as if she wanted to say something but didn't trust her voice. Lucas spoke gently, "Are you alone?" She gave a small nod, barely perceptible, but he saw it. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked, keeping his tone soft, almost a whisper. Her voice, when it finally came, was so faint he had to lean in to hear it. "No." Lucas didn't ask anything else right away. He let the silence hang between them, not out of awkwardness, but out of respect. She looked too fragile for too many questions. Instead, he held out his hand. He didn't rush her. He just waited. Her eyes flicked to his palm, then to his face, searching for something, maybe a reason to trust him. After a long pause, her small, cold fingers reached out and settled in his. Her hand was trembling, her grip uncertain, but she didn't pull away. Lucas stood slowly, helping her to her feet. Her stuffed animal dangled from her other hand, its fur matted and dripping. Without a word, he guided her through the gleaming lobby. People turned to look, some curious, others concerned, but no one said anything. Lucas didn't care. He didn't stop walking until they reached the hotel's restaurant. It was quiet at this hour, with only a few guests lingering over late dinners. The maitre d' looked up in surprise when he saw Lucas, but Lucas gave a slight nod that said everything. Within minutes, a small table was cleared near the window, warm soup was brought out, and a thick blanket was gently draped over the girl's shoulders. She still hadn't spoken again, but she climbed onto the chair and picked up the spoon with both hands, as if unsure how to begin. She ate slowly at first, then faster, hunger overtaking caution. Lucas sat across from her, not eating, just watching. Not in judgment, but in quiet observation. She didn't cry. There were no tears now, only the occasional furtive glance in his direction, as if trying to understand why this man, so clean, so calm, so far removed from her world, was sitting across from her while she ate something warm for the first time in who knew how long. And Lucas, watching her in silence, felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with a 6-year-old girl who hadn't said her name. When the girl had finished eating, she didn't say anything. She simply placed her spoon down carefully, as though afraid she might be scolded for making noise, and kept her eyes on the tablecloth. Lucas didn't push. He let her sit in silence, wrapped in the soft blanket, her legs swinging slightly above the floor. A waiter came by to clear the table, and Lucas waved him off with a glance. There was no urgency here. Not anymore. He leaned forward a little, resting his elbows on the edge of the table, his voice as calm as it had been before. "Can I ask your name?" he said. She looked up at him again, slower this time, as if deciding she might trust him just a little. "Haley," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, hoarse from the cold and from not having spoken much. He nodded. "Hi, Haley. I'm Lucas." She didn't respond to that, but she didn't look away either. He took that as progress. After another pause, he asked, "Do you know where your mom is?" This time, her face shifted. Something in her expression darkened, not fear, exactly, but something close to it. A memory she didn't want to touch. Still, she answered. "She didn't come back," she said. Her fingers tightened around the stuffed animal again. She was working. Cleaning rooms. At a different hotel. Then she didn't come home. The words came out in pieces, as though she were still assembling them in her head. Lucas's expression remained steady, though inside, something clenched. He nodded again, encouraging her to keep going. "Where were you staying?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "In a basement," she said. "A lady let us stay there, for a while. But Mama couldn't pay. So the lady told us to leave." Lucas didn't interrupt. He waited, letting her take her time. "Mama told me to stay with the neighbor. She said she'd come back. But she didn't." The last sentence was barely a whisper. Haley's eyes were dry, but there was something in them, something too old for her face, something that shouldn't exist in a child's gaze. She wasn't crying because she'd already cried herself out. Because children like her learn too soon that crying doesn't always fix anything. Lucas reached for a small linen napkin and quietly handed it across the table, not because she needed it for tears, but because it was something human. Something normal. She took it wordlessly, held it for a second, then tucked it into her lap. Lucas leaned back slightly, absorbing everything she told him. The pieces formed a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. A mother gone. A child left alone. No home. No help. And now, sitting across from him, this brave little girl who hadn't begged, hadn't panicked, hadn't asked for anything except a corner to disappear into. He had dealt with crises before, investors walking out, deals collapsing, millions on the line, but none of that compared to the quiet weight sitting in front of him now. For the first time in years, Lucas West felt completely unprepared. And it shook him. That same night, after making sure Haley was warm and resting in one of the quieter guest suites on the top floor, Lucas stepped into his office on the 20th floor and closed the door behind him. The lights of the city stretched out beyond the tall windows, but for once, he wasn't looking at them. His phone was already in his hand. With a few quick taps, he called his head of security and gave precise instructions to begin looking for a woman named Emily Harris, last known to be working as a cleaner at a local hotel, possibly without official paperwork or permanent residence. He didn't care about red tape. He cared about time. Within the hour, a private investigator was on the case. Lucas knew people, and when he decided something had to be done, it was done fast. Names were run through internal hotel systems, employment records were checked quietly, and calls were placed to hospitals, shelters, and every hotel manager in the city who owed him a favor, or who simply knew better than to ask questions. Meanwhile, Lucas returned to Haley's suite. She was already asleep, curled up in a bed far too big for her, the stuffed animal clutched tightly to her chest. The blanket had slipped off her shoulder, and he adjusted it gently, then stood watching her for a long moment. Her breathing was steady now. Peaceful. The next morning, Lucas arranged everything. He didn't delegate this. He personally called the best nanny agency he knew, requesting someone experienced, patient, and kind. He bought new clothes in her size, had toys brought in, books, even a purple nightlight after the nanny gently mentioned that some kids couldn't sleep well in total darkness. Lucas made space for her not just physically, but with a kind of careful attention he didn't even realize he had in him. He cleared his morning meetings. He reviewed proposals with one hand while watching her eat breakfast with the other. She still didn't smile. She barely spoke. But she let the nanny brush her hair, and she asked for water once. Tiny things. But he noticed every one of them. On the third day, just as the sky was beginning to turn gray with the approach of another storm, Lucas got a call from the investigator. A woman matching Emily's description had been found unconscious in a city hospital 3 days ago. No ID. Severely dehydrated and malnourished. She had collapsed in the street, near a bus stop, and was taken to the emergency room by a passerby. Because she had no identification, no one had known who she was. She had remained unconscious until the night before, and even then, her condition had been fragile. Lucas didn't hesitate. He gave the hospital his name, authorized every cost without blinking, and demanded a full update on her condition. Then he walked down the hallway to Haley's room and stood outside the door for a moment before going in. She was sitting on the floor with a coloring book, quietly humming to herself, her knees drawn up as she focused on a page filled with blue scribbles. She looked up when he entered, eyes wide and alert. "Your mom," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "They found her. She's in the hospital. She fainted, but she's alive. She's going to be okay." Haley didn't speak right away. She blinked at him, her lips slightly parted, the crayon still in her hand. Slowly, as if not sure she'd heard him right, she said, "She's really alive?" He nodded. "Yes. She's going to get better." And then, for the first time since he'd met her, her mouth quivered, her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Can I see her?" Lucas felt his throat tighten as he said, "Soon. Very soon. I promise." Lucas arrived at the hospital later that afternoon, holding Haley's small hand as they entered through the emergency wing. The staff had been alerted ahead of time, and despite the usual chaos of patients and movement, everything seemed to clear before them as they were led through a quiet corridor to a recovery room on the 4th floor. Haley walked beside him without speaking, her fingers wrapped tightly around his, her face pale but composed. She had insisted on wearing her new purple coat, and she carried her stuffed animal in her other arm, clinging to it like a lifeline. The nurse outside the room gave Lucas a quiet nod. "She's awake," the woman said softly, "but still weak. We haven't told her much. We thought it would be better if she saw her daughter herself." Lucas thanked her and gently reached for the door. He turned to Haley, crouched down, and looked her in the eyes. "She's inside. Take your time, okay?" The little girl nodded, and for a moment, her composure cracked just slightly. Then she pushed open the door and stepped into the room without hesitation. Emily Harris was sitting up in bed, thin and pale, her arms resting weakly on the blanket. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes sunken with exhaustion, but they lit up the moment she saw the tiny figure entering the room. "Haley," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The girl froze for a heartbeat, and then rushed forward with a sudden cry, throwing her arms around her mother, the stuffed toy squished between them. Emily held her daughter as tightly as her strength would allow, her hands shaking, her breaths uneven. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she repeated her daughter's name over and over like a prayer, like an anchor pulling her back to life. Lucas stayed in the doorway, watching silently. He didn't move, didn't speak. This wasn't his moment. It was theirs. He saw Emily clutching her child like she might vanish again if she let go. He saw Haley's small fingers gripping the hospital gown, her face buried in her mother's chest. No explanations were needed. This was what mattered. This was the answer to every question the last few days had thrown at him. After a long while, Emily looked up, still cradling Haley, and her eyes met Lucas's. She froze for a second, confused, and then something shifted in her face, recognition, disbelief. "You," she said hoarsely. "You're the man from the hotel. The owner." Her voice cracked, but there was no fear in it. Only amazement. Lucas stepped further into the room and gave a slight smile, nodding. "Yes. I found Haley at the entrance. She was cold, alone. I couldn't walk away." Emily looked at her daughter, then back at him, tears still on her cheeks. "You took care of her?" she asked, almost as if she couldn't believe it. "You brought her here?" Lucas didn't speak immediately. He just looked at the woman, exhausted, broken, but alive, and said quietly, "She was brave. She waited for you. She never stopped hoping." Emily wiped her eyes with one trembling hand. "I thought I'd never see her again," she whispered. "I thought I failed her." Her voice broke on the last word, and Haley looked up at her with wide, serious eyes. "You didn't," Lucas said gently. You did everything you could. And now she's safe. You both are. Silence settled in the room for a few moments, thick but calm. The storm was outside now, not here. And in that small hospital room, under two bright lights and the steady beeping of machines, something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, relief, and something else. A beginning. Something raw and unformed, but real. The days after the hospital reunion passed quietly, almost cautiously, as if none of them dared to move too quickly and disturb the fragile peace they had found. Emily was transferred to a private recovery suite, where she could rest without the noise and pressure of the general ward. Lucas handled everything, her treatment, her food, even arranging for a proper doctor to visit her daily. He visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with Haley, and each time he brought something small, a book, a soft sweater, once even a tiny plant for the windowsill that Haley had picked out herself. Emily always looked surprised, always seemed unsure how to thank him, but Lucas never asked for gratitude. He wasn't there for that. One afternoon, while Haley was napping in a chair by the window, Lucas sat beside Emily in silence. She looked better now, still tired, still thinner than she should be, but the color had returned to her face, and her eyes no longer held the wild, panicked look of someone trying to survive. She turned to him after a while and asked, "Why did you help us?" "Really?" Her voice was quiet, not suspicious, just curious. "You didn't know us. You didn't have to." Lucas leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. His gaze drifted to the child sleeping beside them, then back to the woman who had once been a stranger. "When I was a kid," he said after a pause, "I had a younger brother. His name was Ethan. He was 5 years younger than me, curious, always climbing things he wasn't supposed to, always laughing too loudly." His voice was calm, but there was a tightness in it now, something deeper beneath the words. "One afternoon, he slipped on the stairs in our backyard. I was supposed to be watching him. I wasn't. I thought he'd be fine. But he wasn't." Emily didn't interrupt. She just listened. "He died before the ambulance arrived," Lucas continued, his voice low. "After that, everything changed. My parents were present, but not really. Grief took over the house. I grew up fast. I built walls. I succeeded at everything because I couldn't afford to fail at anything ever again. But that guilt," he hesitated, then gave a hollow laugh. "That never really left." Emily's expression softened with something that wasn't pity, but understanding. A kind of recognition. "When I saw Haley that night outside the hotel," Lucas went on, "I didn't know her story. I didn't know who she was. But I saw that look, the one Ethan had when he'd get hurt and try not to cry. I saw the way she clung to that toy like it was the only thing in the world that made sense. And I couldn't leave her. I couldn't lose another child." Emily reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, but steady. "You didn't lose her," she said. "You saved her." Lucas didn't reply for a moment. He looked down at their hands and then gave the faintest nod. Then, hesitantly, Emily spoke again. "I was married once. He wasn't like you." Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled it back. "At first, he was charming. That's how it always starts, right? He made me feel like I mattered. Then he made me feel like I owed him. Then like I was nothing without him." Her voice cracked. "I left when I found out I was pregnant. I hid. Changed cities. Cleaned rooms, waited tables, did anything I could. I never let Haley near him. Never let him know she existed." Lucas didn't look away. He didn't ask for details she didn't want to give. He just sat there, listening in the way no one else ever had. "You protected her," he said simply. "I tried," Emily whispered. "But I failed too. When I fainted. I thought that was it. I thought she'd be alone forever. She wasn't, Lucas said. You gave her everything you could. And when you couldn't anymore, someone else stepped in. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you survived. There was a long silence after that, but it wasn't heavy. It was full of things that didn't need to be said. Trust, fragile but real, settled between them. Lucas looked at her and saw not just the woman from the hospital bed, not just the mother fighting to hold her daughter's world together, but someone strong, someone who had crawled through hell and kept walking. And Emily, in turn, looked at Lucas not as the wealthy man from the posters, but as someone haunted, someone healing, someone who had chosen, against everything his world might have taught him, to care. When Haley stirred and reached sleepily for both of them, neither of them moved away. A year later, the air in their lives felt different. Softer. Steadier. There were no more hospital visits, no rushed phone calls in the middle of the night, no cold lobbies with watchful eyes. Life had settled into something that resembled peace, not perfect, not without its challenges, but real. Lucas had kept his promise to both Emily and Haley, though in truth, he had given them far more than either of them had asked for. The modest apartment he gifted them wasn't just a safe place to live, it was a home, carefully chosen on a quiet street near a school, with a small garden in the back where Haley had planted 2 sunflowers and a row of crooked tulips. Emily had cried when she first stepped inside. Not because of the furniture or the size or the view from the balcony, but because it had a front door that locked and no shadows on the walls. It was theirs. And no one could take it away. Haley adapted quickly. Children often do, but there was something in her that had always held on to hope, even when everything else was slipping away. She walked to school every morning with a backpack that had tiny purple stars on it and told anyone who asked that purple was her lucky color. She made friends easily, not loudly, but warmly, and teachers often remarked how kind she was, how steady, how she always noticed when someone needed help. At home, she filled the walls with drawings, houses with wide windows, rooms with soft yellow lights, people holding hands under blue skies. More than once, Emily found her daughter sketching at the kitchen table with complete focus, tongue between her teeth, mumbling about buildings and bridges and how Mr. Lucas says architects don't just make things pretty, they make them strong. Lucas had become a regular part of their lives, though he never pushed. At first, he came by on Sundays, bringing groceries or a small gift for Haley, a book about skyscrapers, a puzzle shaped like a museum. Sometimes he stayed for lunch, sometimes just for tea. Emily, still cautious with her heart, kept a respectful distance, but something about his presence made it easier to breathe. She didn't feel watched when he was there. She didn't feel judged. He spoke to her like she mattered, like her opinions were worth listening to, and slowly, she began to believe him. Over time, Sunday visits turned into weekend outings, walks in the park, rainy afternoons spent at art galleries or the quiet wing of the Natural History Museum where Haley could press buttons on the models of buildings and light up their hidden structures. Lucas didn't talk about work much around them. He still ran his hotel empire, still sat in boardrooms and closed deals that made headlines. But when he was with them, he seemed different. Softer, less distracted. He no longer checked his phone every 5 minutes. He started laughing more. And once, when Haley tugged on his sleeve and called him ours, he didn't correct her. He just smiled, with something in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. For Emily, trust came like the slow tide, returning, retreating, then inching closer again. She had built a life out of silence and strength, but around Lucas, she found herself speaking more freely. She told him about her dreams before everything went wrong, how she had once wanted to be a teacher, how she used to love poetry. She confessed how scared she had been, every night alone with Haley, listening for footsteps that might find them. Lucas never interrupted, never tried to fix her pain with empty promises. He just listened. And in that quiet, she found room to heal. One Sunday afternoon, after lunch, Haley disappeared into her room and returned with a drawing folded carefully into quarters. She handed it to Lucas without a word. He opened it slowly. It showed a small house with 3 stick figures holding hands in front of it. One had long hair, one had a stuffed animal, and the third had blonde scribbles on its head and a blue tie. Above them was written in crooked, bright letters, "Our Home." Lucas stared at it for a long moment. He didn't speak. He just looked at Haley, then at Emily, then back at the drawing. And in that moment, without ceremony or declaration, he realized something had shifted inside him. He had spent his life building towers, counting profits, surrounding himself with precision and control. But this child, this woman, this life they were building quietly, steadily, together, this was what he had never dared to imagine. He hadn't just helped them find a home. They had given him one too. And as Haley curled into his side, content and smiling, and Emily met his gaze with a soft, steady look that held no fear anymore, Lucas finally understood what it meant to belong. This story is not just about rescue, it's about mutual healing. The ending feels especially meaningful to me because it doesn't offer a fairy tale finale where everything is instantly perfect. Instead, it shows how love and trust grow not from grand gestures, but from simple, quiet choices, to stay, to listen, to not walk away. Lucas, who's spent his life in a world where worth is measured by numbers and influence, discovers true meaning in something that can't be bought: closeness, responsibility, vulnerability. And Emily, exhausted from hiding her pain, finally allows herself to live instead of just survive. Haley becomes the invisible thread that binds them into a real family. The ending doesn't place a period, it opens a door. That's where its strength lies.